just had a referendum where the yes vote about the closer EU integration came through, but only barely. When Ukrainians tried to bring their relations closer to EU, Russia had a problem with that. Now, Georgia had a parliamentary election, the first parliamentary election under the new system that they have changed. And if you just check the results itself, it looks like Georgians do not want closer relations with the EU. But we'll talk about all that with first, of course, we have Jonathan, as always, but we have two special guests from Georgia, Anano and Mariam. Hey, guys.
Hey.
And
Hello.
let me go.
Yes.
Yeah, great to have you guys on, because I don't have that much information about Georgia. I know a little, and I know a little bit about the general context. But let's go to so people know more about the context. Anano, can you tell us a little bit about basically what so Georgia used to be part of the Soviet Union, and I don't want a whole historical lessons all 30 years, but sort of just general what has been the direction it has been going, and sort of what has been coming up for this election.
So first of all, thank you for having me and showing interest in this crucial topic for the Georgian people, because the shows like this and the platforms really shed the spotlight on what is happening in different countries of the world. And this representation and exposure really matters for the country such small as Georgia. To truly understand what's the context in Georgia and in the region, we have to understand who Georgian people are and what they have stood for thousands of years. They have developed a unique identity, shaped resilience against invasions and occupations of empires throughout the history. Well, after centuries of foreign rule and incorporation into Russia empire in the 19th century, Georgia briefly achieved independence in 1918 to 1921. But we have finally in 1991, after the Soviet Union was dissolved, Georgia regained independence, and we have been proud of having this heritage and continuing our way to independence and the history. To understand why EU or NATO or all of these organizations matter to the Georgian people, you have to understand the geographical location of Georgia, which is positioned between Europe and Asia and shares a lengthy border with Russia. So it makes us vulnerable to the Russian influence.
Have we lost Anano? Okay, so we'll go, let's see if we can get her back, but I just quickly wanted to say on what she said, something that has made me particularly interested in this is I see a lot of, I'm from Slovakia, and there are a lot of parallels when it comes to Georgia and Slovakia, similar sort of like never was a sovereign country until basically the Soviet Union fell apart. Slovakia wasn't part of the Soviet Union, but was part of the Soviet bloc. And after it fell apart, it had a big choice. Basically, do you want to be aligned with Russia, or do you want to be aligned more with the West? And that is a fight that has to be fought. So maybe I can jump to Mariam now. And can you tell me a little bit about generally sort of the Russian relationships with Georgia? Some people might not know, but there are two basically regions in Georgia that are, and that's a good occupied. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, definitely. So based on what Anano was saying when she cut off, is that Georgia has been fighting and emancipating for centuries, and the last 2 centuries it has been from either Russian Kingdom or the Soviet Union, led by 15 nations, but mostly it was, of course, under the Russian Soviet Republic governance of the Russian Federation. And after the Soviet Union dismantled, there was a huge civil war going on in Georgia. We started being more economically independent, we started cutting Russian ties, but it really proved to be detrimental to the Georgian economy. And Russia started tightening the relations with Georgia, also especially trade relations. It really showed into the hyperinflation. We had, I think, 7,000% inflation in 1994, and it really resulted in a huge crisis in Georgia. And after that, we have been calming down, basically. This has been a 35 years of calming down and really trying to see what kind of relations could we have with Russia. And as for 1991, I think a lot of utopian Western liberal countries, as well as Georgia, had this illusion that Russia could turn into a democratic country and it could evolve into something less imperialistic, which led us to having or trying to have friendly relations with the Russian Federation. However, it proved to be also detrimental to us in over the years, but mostly in 2008 when we waged war between one another. It is after the Rose Revolution of 2003 when United National Movement came to power in Georgia, and with it has been the relations with Russia have been deteriorating ever since. We had a war in Abkhazia and also during the civil war in 1992 and 1993, but this was not really a civil war. It was a ethnically fueled conflict that was also fueled by Russia, especially in Abkhazia and Samachablo, that is now called South Ossetia. But their occupation was really sealed in 2008 when Russian forces came. It took them 5 days and we surrendered. Even though there was help from the West, our Western friends, there was really nothing that could have been done. And I think as of today, only 5 countries recognize the independence of Abkhazia and Samachablo, which, as I mentioned, is called South Ossetia.
So just a quick clarification on that, on specifically the sort of almost like a Russian foreign policy, is something that we've seen in the past, especially with Putin. He made his comments about, the greatest tragedy was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And the sort of Russian strategy we've seen a lot of times is used the justification, well, there are Russians living in this area, don't they have ethnic determination to basically, rejoin if they want to, which usually means they invade first and then they have the referendum about joining. But is that the similar thing that has been going, how you pronounce it?
Yeah. So, for example, Putin in 2008, before invading, said that he was defending the rights of ethnic Abkhazians who are under the threat and in danger from ethnic Georgians. But what I wanted to say is the population of the Abkhazian region is mostly ethnically Georgian people, ethnically Kartvelian people, and ethnically Abkhazian people were in minority in that sense, but the Georgian Republic always stood for their rights. However, the ethnic minority was really a victim of the informational war, which back then in 1992, nobody knew what the term hybrid war meant. And nobody could really identify why the war was waged between one another. And nobody could also identify Russia as a key player in the civil war. But that is what happened there. It was ethnic minority really exerting a lot of power over the ethnic majority, which ended in mass deportations of ethnic Georgians from Abkhazia. We still have a big ethnic Georgian population right now outside of Abkhazia who cannot enter the border and see their home or see the graves of their loved ones, for example.
I want to also add some context. Our viewers, some of them not even know that we're talking about the Georgia, the country, not the US state. It's important to mention that, I think. Unfortunately, some people are not aware of that. Georgia, specifically for viewers of this channel, has been one of the freest countries in the world in the first decade of the 2000s. I think when did you have Kacha as the finance minister? It was 2000.
2006 is when he came to power, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, so for a few years they have a very capitalistic finance minister, and Georgia has seen a huge economic boom during those years. And there's something very unique about Georgia, where the educational system, a lot of the universities, they don't teach crazy, nihilistic ideas of. They don't have wokeism. They don't have all these progressive agendas. A lot of them are actually pro-free market. There are a lot of Maria Menanu. They're both from SFL, Students for Liberty. There's a robust movement of people who are actively calling for capitalism, calling for freedom, and also advocating for Ayn Rand specifically. So this is definitely a country where we have a lot of allies, which is also why I think it's so important that we talk about this in this channel.
Yeah, as you said, something that I found out a few years ago, and that might interest Ayn Rand fans, is there is a Gold and Taggart bank in Georgia, which is really nice to see. So let me cover quick super chats. We have a super chat from Bonnie asking, is it true that Putin's long-term goal is it to take back as many former Soviet countries as possible? Does he state that openly? So we've sort of covered this, but Anano, do you have anything to add on that? And also welcome back.
Uh, Thank you so much. So when we are talking about the regional context, of course, he hasn't openly just stated that he wants to take back all of us, but it has been the talk and the discussion sparked by the Russian government and Russian electives throughout the time in history, and just making getting back the glory of the USSR. So Russia has always had its imperial ideas and its imperial ambitions in the region, and it has never stopped, and it hasn't stopped since. It's still going. And have you already discussed a foreign influence law in this podcast already? So if we touch base on that, the foreign influence law has been initiated first in Georgia in 2023 and then enacted in 2024. The same law has been initiated in the multiple countries in the region. And it is important to understand the concept of this law, which means that which targets mostly the NGOs, journalists, and activists, and also individuals who are financed by the foreign governments. I know that the similar, and we also know that the similar laws and bills already exist in all over the world. For example, in the United States as well. It's also China has one, Russia has one, which it elected in 2012, and the agent law and now the foreign influence law that has been enacted in Georgia in 2024 is similar to the one that Russia has, and it's not only Georgia. It has been it has been initiated in Abkhazia, as Mariam mentioned. You already understand the context. In South Ossetia, they both of those de facto countries have enacted the same law. The same law was initiated in Kyrgyzstan. The same law has been initiated in Hungary. The same law has been initiated in Bulgaria, in Montenegro. So you understand the tendency. The funny thing is also that there has been the second law, LGBT, anti-LGBTQ propaganda law, that has been initiated or enacted at the same time. So this KGB propaganda that wants to gather as many sympathies and electorate as possible in their region. They try to work with the exact same scenario, and they are not even changing the words. They are not even changing the content. They are not even changing how they give out this information to people. So to really understand the context, the same propaganda, the same laws, the same scenarios are happening all around the region. In the kind of countries that Russia has like pro-Russian government already and has close ties, or at least they have the pro-Russian opposition parties that can initiate all those kind of laws and really gather the sympathies from the.
So essentially, Anano, this law means, correct me if I'm wrong, that people who run like NGOs, organizations that educational or political organizations that advocate for something that the government doesn't like joining the EU or joining NATO, they would be defunded, right?
No. So what this law enacts is the following: any organization, any individual, and it's very important because it was expanded after the law was initiated the second time, or any individual that is funded by the foreign government, and the funding exceeds the 20% of the overall funding that they are receiving, should register or some. Still, we don't know the logistics. They should register and they should be labeled. First, it was as agents in quotation, and now it's like foreign influenced organizations and etc. So basically, and it is also not clear what kind of activities are they talking about. So it says also in quotation, any organization or an individual that takes some part in political activities. And the political activities can vary, right? So there is no clear definition, and is funded more than 20% from the foreign government, should be labeled this or that. So
Yeah, just to add some more context. Oh, Mariam.
Sorry, I just wanted to say why this law is detrimental, because at first you hear, okay, register, it's what the narrative is in the government is that it's a transparency law, and it just gives all the organizations a platform to voice, oh, hey, we are funded by this organization or this particular donor from foreign sources. However, it not only demonizes and stigmatizes all of the non-governmental organizations because they are literally called the foreign powers, including the Georgian population, for example, like the staff of some non-governmental organization. It could be somebody that was born and raised in Georgia, registering as a foreign influencer. But it also gives the government a justification to investigate all of these organizations and listen legally to all of the calls, all of the conversations, it can be any like text messages. They have the right to raid your home, and it has happened. The members of Atlantic Council, like a week ago, I think their house got raided. Now their bank accounts are frozen. This is all based on an anonymous letter. So they don't need any legal basis. They just need an anonymous letter that might as well be done by one of the government officials, and they have the right to raid your home, to listen to you. It's basically 1984, just in fruition.
yes.
Yeah.
And I want to add some of my personal experience, Dan, if I may. I've been to Georgia many times. The Georgians are very happy people. They're very hospitable. They're very fun people. But this time when I came in September, a month before the election, I could tell on my friends that they're down, they're sad, and it was never like that. Usually, people are very thrilled, but especially a friend of mine who runs one of these NGOs who are targeted. He's not doing well, and people are extremely concerned. People are talking about. I was talking to people about what will you do if the Dream Party wins after the election. They'll say, "I have to leave. I have to leave the country." And a lot of people
that is
are.
exactly how the Russian machine works. It demoralizes people and it strips them off of any hope the population may have. And all the Russian machine and Georgian Dream also knew that if they won these elections, it would have been much easier to implement any policy, because anybody advocating for anything different would just leave. They just underestimated the patriotism, I think, of all the people that are employed in the non-governmental organizations and so-called like influencers of foreign power that are actually working in the interest of a country.
So Jonathan mentioned the Dream Party. Someone in the chat is asking who passed this law. So before we go into the election, I'd like to ask Anano, can you just give us some, personalities, political parties, just like a quick rundown, so we know who we are talking about, who are the important movers?
So at least we can memorize the names, if not the political pre-election programs. So we're talking about a few players, Georgia Dream, and as some of the people now changed the name and call it Georgian Nightmare. Then which is the government party right now within the majority in our parliament. Then we have Coalition for Change, a United National Movement, Strong Georgia, and Kaharia for Georgia. So basically, we have Georgian Dream and four clear opposition parties that had the chance to cross the barrier of 5% to have their mandates in the parliament.
So just a quick something that I found interesting is something that has changed is this is the first election that is under the new system. Can you just give us basically the difference of what has changed and why this is viewed as like a really important election?
As we have already provided the context, first, I want to also emphasize on the morale, if you don't mind. When we mentioned why the Georgian people were demoralized before these elections. So in 2023, when this agent law first was initiated, thousands of people took to the streets of Tbilisi, and the protests were not organized by any particular political parties, but rather they were led by the civil society. And the foreign agent law was not enacted. So this was the victory of Georgian people. That there was the spirit of Georgian people that the civil society and your choices and the will of Georgian people will win. And that was it. But in 2024, the Georgian Dream once again initiated law and they passed the law. So you understand the aggression and also demoralization of people when they also once again took to the streets, protests, demonstrations, which got raided with the water cannons, gas, and everything, and stood there. But we could not. We could not protect ourselves from the government the second time. So that really demoralized the people, that really inspired the will for change. Also, in the past years, we have seen pro-Russian tendencies from the Georgian government. And it was not the simple foreign influence law or the protests that were raided by the government. There were like strong tendencies that were showed in the growth in the economic dependence to the Russian to Russia. Also, it was showed in the messages and message boxes that the Georgian Dream had to Russia or compared to the EU, how they did not just even met with the officials from the EU, and they neglected everything that was faced for Georgia to step forward into the EU integration. And when we're talking about the background that was happening in Georgia before the elections, it is important to understand that this doesn't state on just simple loss. They betrayed Georgian people, and they constantly, since 2012, slowly, step by step, stirred up the propaganda, and they started driving Georgia from the direction to EU, which was our vector for a long time, to the direction towards Russia. And if you're interested, later we can go into like more details and talk about the stats and etc. So this was the background before the elections in 26th of October. That's why a lot of people, unprecedented amount of people, immigrants, the first-time voters, went to the elections and they voted. They voted because they wanted to see the change. They wanted to get back to the direction that Georgia was heading years before the Georgian Dream Party came into the majority. Also, it is important to understand it was the first time in Georgia that we had electronic elections as well. It was a step forward as for the democratic country to have this electronic elections, because it is not possible to rig the system when you have the electronic elections, because it is not solely dependent on who's counting the votes, because there's machines and operations involved and organizations who are taking care of it. But Georgian Dream found ways of carousel voting, blackmailing, buying votes, buying even the IDs from people. They even abrupted the secrecy of the elections as well. So this is the sort of outline and the background of the elections, and we can now go and discuss into details.
Yeah, I definitely. So let's go. I just have one quick question before that, and that's sort of like because you've mentioned, you know, something that happens in democracies is, of course, you have parliamentary elections. A government gets elected, and then they try to pursue their program of what they sort of promised to do. But something you also see is people having problem with that, and I'm experiencing similar thing in Slovakia. Hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, and when you have this sort of non-responsive government that basically looks at hundreds of thousands of people on streets, and nothing changes, that really does fill you with this desperation that basically, yeah, I'm almost like living under the authoritarian regime. Like the politicians are actually not responding to anything. So my question was sort of, what was the hope? Something that hope for the election, because something that I found really surprising. I really like polls, and I like to look at polls and see what they tell me. And something I've noticed is a big difference between specifically, I think it was Gorby and Savanta, Edison Research, and ISA, basically like almost twice the difference of the main party, basically, or sort of like 30% difference of how much the main party was supposed to get. So
we have to actually discuss the key players to get to the actual polls. I'm sorry if I interrupted the question. I just have to clarify that Edison Research and Harry Sachs were both carried out by two independent TV stations who still have affiliation with certain political parties in the opposition. So Formula has had an affiliation with the United National Movement that ordered Edison Research, and Harry Sachs was also ordered by, I think it was Mtavari TV. Mtavari TV has an affiliation with Number 4, which is Coalition for Change. However, these are independent media entities founded by people once being founded by the people in these political parties. Imedi TV is strongly backed by the government. It is paid by the government subsidies, and also it is the one under direct control of the governing political party, Georgian Dream. So Imedi ordered the Gorby Research, which was completely different. So Gorby Research, in the first, like, it was the opinion poll, it showed 70% support for Georgian Dream and like 3 to 4% support to all the other major opposition parties that were actually, of course, crossing the 5% threshold. And also exit polls are very interesting. Like exit polls of Edison Research and Harry Sachs were saying that Georgian Dream had gotten 41% of the votes and the opposition collectively had gotten more than 50%. I think it was 51. And the Gorby research showed that Georgian Dream had actually gathered 57% of the votes. And these opinion polls were published as the polling stations closed. And after that, of course, the Central Election Committee counted the preliminary votes, said it was 52. And after all the districts were counted, apparently Georgian Dream had 54%. As it operates today, it's 54.1.
So, 10%, that's definitely more than you would expect, sort of like a general, percentages of going one way or the other. So let's talk about the election itself. How, I think, Mariam, you were one of the, can you remind me what exactly? Observers. Yeah. So can you just give us your general ideas of how the day went? And also, what do you think is behind this like massive differences?
Definitely. I'm going to let you in on all the secrets, which are not the secrets anymore. Of course, it's all public. But first, let's say why these elections were important. This was, as we said, first parliamentary elections done in fully proportional system. And this is also the first parliamentary elections where the parliament elected chooses our president. So Georgia has been a presidential republic historically. And after 2016, we declared that we were actually a parliamentary republic, which is after Saakashvili from United National Movement lost his votes. We elected a president representing Georgian Dream, and then this president was stripped away of all the rights. Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is a billionaire funding the Georgian Dream, went into the shadows, said no to governing in the light, and started governing from his mansion in the shadows. And this is the first elections where parliament has more power than ever, because they are actually also deciding who's the president. And I don't know if you know this, but our president is our only hope. It's the only pro-Western figure in the government, in the executive power that we have right now. And there's a huge dichotomy. It sometimes gives us cognitive dissonance to what the parliament is saying and how completely the opposite the president is saying. The president was called to court today, and she did not show up. So there is a huge conflict between the two, and this president being renounced by the government and then having to be re-elected, it's very important. So that's why we went into this election day with all our motivation, all our energy to gather as many votes as we could. And I was representing an independent non-governmental organization, of course. The missions were funded from the OSCE/ODIHR. They were also funded by the European Union directly and also from the United Nations directly. And these three key players had also some international observers, but there were more than 3,000 local observers concentrated in the election districts. There were 3,111 election districts. And so we had almost all the polling stations covered by the independent observers. As Anan already said, there were four major coalitions or parties that were crossing the 5% threshold. And as I already mentioned, the exit polls and the opinion polls looked very promising, except one, which was government-backed. So we didn't really count on them being correct. And as I said, Central Election Committee declared that Georgian Dream had 54%. This means that they would get 89 mandates in the current parliament, where we are electing 150 MPs, and the opposition would have 61. And one of the polling stations was aborted on the day because there were massive stuffing of ballots directly caught on camera. So the Central Election Committee really had nothing to do other than annul that particular station. But what right now is happening, and this is a little introduction, is that the mission that I said right now is demanding in court. Today was actually the first hearing, demanding in court that 246 of these polling stations are completely annulled because of all the rigging that happened. And that amounts to more than 417,000 votes, which is a lot of electorate considering 2 million, a bit more than 2 million people showed up in the elections. That's like more than a fifth. That's basically an introduction to what happened during the election day. But the rigging started way before the election day. For example, this scheme that the Moscow, along with the Georgian Dream, had is, first of all, the election committee consists of 17 people on each polling station. 8 of them are independent and 9 of them are party assigned, as to say, like political party representatives. But of course, they are under supervision, so they cannot really rig anything on the spot. And some people are registrators. So they take your ID, they register you, and they give you a ballot and direct you to the booth. These registrators are randomly chosen on the day of the elections. And that's the rule that's written in the Constitution. The registrators were chosen a week before in some polling stations. And that is completely unconstitutional and is a huge breaking of the law, not only for fair elections, but also for fair democracy in the country. So these stations that had registrators chosen a week before are demanded to be annulled. Also, there were several people, the carousels detected, the people had IDs, ID numbers glued on their IDs so they could re-enter the second time. And this was especially prominent in the polling stations where the electronic votes were not happening. And this is also a very important thing. 90% of the polling stations were electronic, but 10% were still not electronic. These are the stations, for example, abroad, like for immigrants, and also in Georgia, some polling stations that had less than 300 voters each polling station, they had non-electronic elections. I was observer, not in Tbilisi. I was an observer in the eastern region. I myself voted, of course, and then went to observe there. And I was in the eastern part of Georgia because it was a special mission there. These villages where I went to are one of the poorest villages, and one of them was even like non-electronic one. They are inhabited by ethnic minorities. In Georgia, we have a lot of villages inhabited by ethnic Azerbaijani people who are, of course, Georgian citizens, and they get their right to vote. Sometimes these people feel politically unimportant, and they don't go to the polling stations because they don't feel like the policy directly affects them or their life and their welfare. So what I had is before the elections, a week before the elections, we took to a door-to-door campaign to encourage them to vote. We gave them newspapers. I especially encouraged young women to vote, and also old women, because these communities are Muslim and usually they are very conservative. And what I mean by conservative is that sometimes we've had instances where men show up on the polling stations with 8 passports of their wives, their children, their mothers, and they're saying, oh, I'm going to vote for all of them. And when you demand that they cannot actually do that and they can only vote for one person, they say, like, this is our tradition and you are right now discriminating against our tradition, which of course is not right, and it's unconstitutional to vote for other people. This didn't happen this year, but what happened this year is that I saw a lot of very old people from these ethnic minority villages, 81 plus years old, voting for the first time. And they were so clueless because these villages are usually marginalized and the education is also not perfect there. These people didn't even know where to go. So after they took their ballots, they started circling the room. They couldn't even go to the voting booth. So many committee representatives followed them into the booth, which is also strictly unconstitutional. You cannot defend the secrecy of a vote with an election committee representative standing right there. There were multiple people entering in the same booth. There were also gangs standing outside of the polling stations. And it is also unconstitutional to stand anywhere in the 100-meter radius of a station and just be there and stand there, because it's considered a rigorous, like, intimidation. And these voter intimidations did happen. I saw it with my own eyes, how some people were standing there making lists of people that showed up, which means that in these villages, usually village decides unanimously who to vote for. And then there is like one person that checks whether all of the village population actually arrived to vote, this time for Georgian Dream. And for example, I have some stats here, like, for example, 9% of the polling stations did not protect the secrecy of the votes. And this is actually amplified if you consider electronic elections, because in the electronic elections, you had to circle the ballot and fill it in with a marker. And the marker actually bled through the paper, and you could see on the other side where the marking was. And if you take a Georgian ballot, we have some political opposition parties on the top, and Georgian Dream is number 41, so it's right at the bottom. And you could maybe not identify whether you voted for 4 or 5, but you could definitely see if you voted for 4 or 5 or 41. And that was also one way that how the election committee, which is supposed to be independent, but of course it is not, could check who people voted for. There were also cameras standing in the rooms and filming people throwing envelopes in the box. And there's a whole debate how it really made people think that and feel like it was 1984 and Big Brother was watching. And it was not good for the reputation of Central Election Committee. Problems were related also to the marking procedure, where they spray your right thumb, and usually some registrators didn't even know where to spray, so they sprayed on the left one, and it amplified the carouseling because they could only check you with the right arm. And most of the checkers who were standing in the line did not check all fingers, they only checked the right thumb. Then we also had 32% of the stations where mass gangs were detected, as I already mentioned, and we had alleged facts of voter bribery. And these briberies happened in 13% of the polling stations, where people were offered either it was 50 lari or 100 lari, which is, to translate, it's either like 20 to 30 US dollars to go in there and vote for a certain party. And Georgian Dream is known for giving people potatoes. And this time, pre-election, they started giving out free beer to the population, for example. And it was also one of the ways. But here's my take. So the votes were definitely stolen. The votes were stolen after the elections, especially in Tbilisi. In Tbilisi, the opposition lost to the Georgian Dream lost to the opposition in every polling station, and it's a city of 1.5 million people. So it's a big city where the Georgian Dream lost, but they still got 40%, which, if you ask me, is still unrealistic for Georgian Dream, considering that 300,000 people were standing outside protesting on the Europe Day in May in torrential rain. And that's just the people who came out of their houses. So 40% still seems like a lot to me, but that's just my take. But most of the rigging happened before the elections. It's not like Maduro in Venezuela, who stole the votes after the elections, but some of the rigging, of course, happened before the elections. The Georgian Dream mainly focused on the hybrid war and the informational war in these villages. And they really took advantage of the fact that these villages are very conservative, and they usually opt to vote for the current government because they don't care who's in power, they just want to keep it like that. And the Georgian Dream has the narrative of being a peacekeeper between Georgia and Russia. As I said, the war happened in 2008 during the United National Movement, so the Georgian Dream has the reputation of being a peacekeeper. What people fail to notice is the creeping occupation and people dying every single day on the border because it gets moved to the south 12 meters or 13 meters weekly or sometimes even daily. And we've had multiple people die because of this. Tamas Gindori very recently was shot. It was last year, November last year, was shot because he wanted to pray in the church where he usually prayed, but one day just was covered in chains and he opened them up. He was shot down. His friend was also injured. He barely survived. That is the kind of peace that the Georgian Dream brought us. But these populations, like these ethnic minorities, don't really know it. And the Georgian Dream usually appears on their door, and they are so uneducated in the political processes that they just give out their IDs. I myself saw that I entered in a house and this lady greeted me and told me, "Oh, did you bring my ID back?" And that means that Georgian Dream rented out some IDs from the village and said, "Oh, don't worry, I will vote for you and we will bring this back," which is also don't get me started on explaining how unconstitutional that is. Not even police is allowed to take your identification card. And this is a very strict violation of like a personal information being processed by the totalitarian government, I can say. That's what happened basically. And the Georgian Lawyers Association, which was also conducting an observation independently from us, but they were our friends in this mission, I can say, they are demanding that all electronic polling stations are aborted and annulled the results, because the secrecy of vote was basically not carried out in any of the polling stations where the elections were electronic. I myself voted, I can testify. You can also Google it and you can see how like the marking really shows through the paper when you turn it upside down. And it was really heartbreaking to see. I was in some village where no electricity was working, and all of the election committee was Georgian Dream representatives, which is also unconstitutional. But these people are mostly working in public schools or public kindergartens, and they are afraid to lose their job. So, of course, when exactly at 8 o'clock, when the polling station closed, the Georgian Dream representative or either the Central Election Committee representative, it doesn't really have any difference anymore, called the committee head, and she looked at the results, like the preliminary results, and only said what the Georgian Dream had gotten. And only like a few minutes later, the opposition, I of course knew who was calling, and of course, like I knew who was checking on the results. And I was there counting every vote. I saw it with my own eyes. Georgian Dream really got 85% plus in that station. I defended every right in that village, and I saw it with my own eyes. These people actually went in and voted for the Georgian Dream. So I will not say that the votes being stolen is the main way how the elections were rigged. The elections were rigged before the elections, and it was done by mass intimidations, gangs paying them out, and just using the informational vacuum that not only the ethnic minorities, but mostly people in the regions have because of the lack of access to the information. And also, I forgot to mention that the Central Election Committee registered way more voters than the actual 18 plus population that Georgia has. I think we have the population of 3.7 million right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Danano, but 3.5 million voters were registered, which is delusional, to say the least.
Also, it has to be noted that it was not the official voters. It is kind of leaves a room for manipulation here. It was voted by Saxtat, which is official statistic organization, but also CESCO, which is the
Central
electronic. Yeah. So they also did not really show the results of how many voters were registered primarily. So that leaves a room of manipulation. There could have been breaking the laws, as we have seen, Mariam has told you already, but just so we don't spread the misinformation on this regard, there's just avoid. But that could have been the manipulation. Other abstractions that Mariam talked about, yeah, they actually we already and the organizations already have gathered the proofs of it. I just want to add one more thing. Even if you looked at the pre-election campaign of Georgian Dream, it would have made you sick to your stomach, because this is maybe not the right wording to put this into, but you have to understand that the Georgian Dream had the pre-election campaign showing ruins of Ukraine, and saying that do not choose war, choose freedom. So this is not even obstruction.
This is basically a threat to Georgian population that if you don't choose us, you are getting.
Yeah, so it's a threat. Yeah, you choose EU or NATO and any other direction. You this is what's going to happen, and showing the ruins of Ukrainian chapels, playing also again on the sentiments, religious sentiments of people or children and etc. Yeah, it is more than just this obstruction. It's just inhumane. Also, a few more points regarding during the elections. Of course, it did not happen. It in some cases it did happen during the elections day on the 26th of October, where they used the old voting system and etc. But you have to understand that it was the electronic system was the electronic voting system was praised by a lot of organizations in Georgia, independent organizations, NGOs. And they have tested this, and it was safe and proved. So Georgian Dream knew that. They spread the narrative, then they played into it quite well, because they knew that it was not possible to actually do any like rigging within the electronic system. So they did it priorly by buying the votes, by blackmail, also by blackmail, and also by fear. So what the Georgian Dream has in a sense, and the card that they are showing, not even hiding, they are not even playing poker or chess, they are just simply play checkers, is that they are manipulating on the fear of people. So this they are also manipulating on ethnic minorities, and what Maria mentioned, didn't what forgot to mention here, is the public sector employees. So coercion extends into the public sector, where employees, especially those working in government roles, are pressured to vote for the ruling party, Georgian Dream, because they will eventually face potential job loss or demotion and etc. And we have seen this not during the elections on the 26th of October, but before the elections, when the thousands of people took to the streets of Tbilisi, protesting the direction that the Georgian Dream Party is taking, grabbing us Georgians towards to. They had contra protests and contra demonstrations showing their support for the Georgian Dream Party. And even though those people who were standing in front of the Georgian parliament in the Rustaveli street, they were brought by microbuses and buses, and they were given money to come here. They were coerced, blackmailed in the regions, and etc. and etc. So it did not it started way before, and it continued during the elections as well. So you have to understand that it extends beyond just marginalized groups or ethnic minorities or less knowledgeable people.
I just want to add one thing. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. It's just that Putin rigged his elections exactly the same way. He bumped up his vote to 10, 15% or whatever he needed. It was not very big amount of percentage that he wrote for himself. And that is why Russian people were very confused when protesting, and the protests were very low key because people didn't think it was so clear cut. And look where Russia is now. Putin doesn't even pretend that it's democracy anymore. And that's basically the biggest threat ahead of us right now. We are fighting.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and I think for the viewers also, this is all incredible because, in America, they talk about stolen election or, fake ballots or thing. And, if you were living in a country that actually does that, and, I live in Slovakia, which is in no way like a fully democratic, fully secure elections. But when I worked in the Electoral Commission, I was surprised how secure our own election was. Basically, the thing I had to read was like this thick. There was every edge case there. Whatever happened, you knew what you were supposed to do because you had a specific thing to do. And if anything went wrong, if a different pen was used in the booth, if there was a different pen found in the booth, if we had different votes, if someone was not on the registry, the poll gets shut down and things are investigated, and it's not open basically until we know, okay, what has happened here. You have random police checks. So you have of course, the privacy of the vote, that you have no idea who the person voted for. If you are in the Electoral Commission, you cannot even mention the political candidates. You cannot talk to the people who are coming to vote. You cannot have a T-shirt of a political party, nothing like that. So hearing this and hearing that basically the polls were like the election wasn't canceled basically after all these things have happened, is again incredible to see, even for me, which we don't have the best election system possible, but it's still decent. And hearing this is again crazy. So now the election was I think 4 days ago, right? So now we had a few days since. So what has been the response, and where are we going now, basically?
So
Mariam?
the opposition party is demanding snap elections, that all results are annulled, and we have snap elections under international supervision, so it shouldn't be carried out by Central Election Commission anymore. And what was the response of the president is that so Salome Zurabishvili did not recognize the results of the election, and she called for mass protests and mass demonstrations, which happened on Monday at 7. And it was one of the biggest rallies that we've had.
Maybe
Some
just a clarification here, because you mentioned you're now a parliamentary republic. Is it the case that basically the president has to name the prime minister, and unless she does that, that is basically like there is nothing the sort of the party that the Georgian Dream can do because the president has to appoint the prime minister?
I am not sure of that question, to be honest. Under the new system, under the old system, that is how it happened. I think it's still relevant, but what I know right now is that the president will be gone very soon, and the new president will be chosen by the parliament. So whoever has the first candidate in, and then the whole parliament votes, it will be Georgian Dream if the Georgian Dream gets the majority, and they will propose a candidate. Everybody will vote. Of course, Georgian Dream has 54%, so they will win. And also considering that the opposition refuses to enter the parliament because it would be a recognition of the results of the election. So the opposition is not entering the parliament right now. None of the parties that cross the 5% threshold. Which means that the Georgian Dream will start either operating solo, or we still have to see. Nothing is very clear-cut also from the opposition, other than them not recognizing the results of the elections. However, there are some countries that congratulated us. Hungary was the first one. Then we had a surprise visit from Viktor Orban, who I believe is still here. I don't know exactly, but he was here in Marriott on the Rustaveli Avenue where the protests were happening. He got booed very actively on the street. There's also Azerbaijan, who congratulated us with Aliyev, and there's also Turkey. There's Venezuela and Maduro congratulating us, but we're carrying out very fair elections. And then there's
the professional election rigger said that.
Yes, definitely. Maduro is impressed by the Georgian Dream here, and also China. So these 5 countries recognize the elections. And what I'm saying to everybody is that even if you don't know or don't educate yourself on the issues that are going on here, at least pay attention to who is praising you and who is not on the international chessboard, so to say, because it's really crazy. And also the Georgian Dream didn't really only lose in Tbilisi, but also in almost every polling station abroad, except Turkey and Azerbaijan. And that also says something. Like Georgian Dream even lost in China. But that is the reality we are faced with. We had one protest, and right now we are waiting for a more clear plan as to what to do in the future. But we are not giving up. Like that's, I think, what they wanted to do is demoralize the civil society and to make us believe that, oh, we can always leave the country. And we can, like a lot of people can, and there are a lot of immigrants. But I think we were raised very differently and in a very patriotic way. At least I was. So I don't think I think they underestimated how much we actually care for this country and how we will not give up on the things that we love. I'm speaking for myself here, definitely, but I think I'm also speaking for most of my generation.
No, I definitely feel that attitude of, and it's similar to Slovakia, with every election we say, well, if this goes wrong, I'm just going away. And, then you'll see people are still fighting, people are still there, wanting the country to be better. So we've run out of time. So I think we've covered it just about. Anything you'd like to add, Anano?
Well, if we had more time, just one more thing that, yes, it did make us lose hope a little. And I have to say I have been one of them. It is hard to grab onto something that is fading away, and you have been stripped away. But eventually, the civil society in Georgia, the most importantly, and I don't want to talk about the opposition party, the civil society in Georgia, um, is still on a good spirit in terms of fighting and ready to defend our votes and defend our rights and our desires that we have and our willingness that we have declared in the elections as well.
Mariam, any last words?
I think I said that we are not giving up. And all I can say is that thank you guys for inviting us to talk about this on the international scale, because I think the international support is what keeps us going right now. And we asked for help. We all work at Students for Liberty. We have a huge volunteer base. A lot of people expressed their willingness to help. There were some people protesting, our volunteers protesting alongside Georgian diaspora in London and the French diaspora in France. There were some people in Warsaw, and it's just amazing to see. I want to thank you, and I want to thank all of my international friends who are interested and willing to educate themselves on this topic, because I think it's very important for us to get all the support to keep our morale up.
Yeah, I just like to add on that, because some people, might be thinking, especially if you live in America or, somewhere in Western Europe, it's like, why should I care? It's a small country. I don't know where it is. But you have to remember, Russia, that is trying to gain foothold in all these countries, is actively fighting against the West. Even if you are super self-interested and you only care about your country, Russia is helping the Houthis attack international shipping. So if you need like a direct evidence of that, it is trying to get any chance it can to hurt the West. And I think we are lucky enough to have actual freedom-minding people in Georgia fighting against that. We don't have to ally ourselves with some like different dictatorship to fight against this dictatorship. There are freedom-minded people in Georgia. So I think that's why it's really important to look into this for issues and to talk about that. Before we go, I should ask both of you, where can people maybe find more about the work you're doing, or anything you'd like to tell people, Mariam?
Follow our Instagram page at European Students for Liberty for international updates about what's going on, not only in Georgia, but also different countries fighting illiberalism there. As for us directly, it's SFL Georgia Instagram handle, which is directly saying and storytelling about the Georgian protests, where you can see more about particularly Georgian SFL and the amazing volunteer work that they do.
Nano?
Yes, definitely follow European Students for Liberty and Georgian Students for Liberty, and also watch the event that we have, Libertical Europe, in the April of 26 to 27. Our main topics also will focus on human dignity, fight for freedom, and fighting the threats to liberty, especially in the region. And as you mentioned, it is important to understand the regional context, the country context, to understand that it is everyone's fight, and this is why you should be aware, this is why you should be involved, and this is why you should be taking some actions, just getting into the discussion or spreading the awareness about these issues.
Jonathan?
Yeah, support the people of Georgia. Voice your support as much as possible on social media, wherever you get the opportunity. This is a good country, beautiful country, great food, great wine, fantastic people. As you can see, with Mariam and Ananu, so many great people there. So support the Georgian struggle for freedom. They are good guys. They want to do good. And yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, support them, voice your support, and hopefully you can withstand this horrible government of yours.
And as Bonnie in the chat is saying, please put all that info in the description. You'll be able to find all the info in the description. Anything you'd like to add, Mariam? I saw you unmuting.
No, nothing. I was just saying thank you to Jonathan and also to you, Daniel, for inviting us once again.
So thank you everybody for joining us for today. Thank you guys for joining on this panel. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again in a week or so with saying, oh, new election has been called, the opposition won, and we now are heading to something better. So we really hope for the best in Georgia. But until then, bye-bye.
Thank you.